Hi 8th grade, welcome to day 3, March 25th of week 1. So like usual, the first thing you want to do is complete your attendance. Then you can jump right into the lesson for the day. There is a optional link that has like a game of what we've been covering. It's not required, but it was just a fun activity that we thought might break up your learning in a fun way. Okay, so here's your lesson. So we're determining if the data has a correlation and using a line of best fit or a trend line to show the relationship. So you have a warm-up. You should be able to do that at this point. You have some vocabulary. So some of you I discussed the first vocabulary word with. This vocabulary word is outlier. It's a value that lies outside of most of the other values in the set of data. So if you think back to the ice cream sales activity we had you guys do yesterday, that point that was at the 90-degree temperature, and I believe it was $200, that was a point that we would call an outlier. It's lying outside of most of the data. Does it make the data change in correlation? No, some of you guys are misunderstanding that. Because that point is there, doesn't affect the correlation because majority of the points we're still traveling in an upwards direction, causing it to be a positive correlation. Sometimes you do have that outlier because remember, this data is real world. So sometimes things happen in life where they're not following the constant trend. I was telling some of you yesterday that 90-degree day with only $200 sales, maybe their freezer broke at the parlor, right? Some of you are connecting to what's happening right now, that maybe, people were under quarantine. So there could be all different reasons for those outliers to exist, but it does not change the correlation. Okay, so I just wanted to clarify that because I know some people were saying there was no correlation because that outlier was throwing them off. So it's okay if one point is outside of the data. We just call that an outlier. The other vocabulary word is a cluster. That's when data seems to be gathered around a particular value. So there's an example provided. Cluster doesn't usually come up too often, but it's good to know the word, and we will practice some of that in today's lesson as well. Okay, so there's an example here. And it says to approximate the coordinate of the outlier. So if you notice, this is showing a positive correlation. Some of you are already understanding that this would also be a strong positive correlation because if you notice, the points are very close to each other. And then right here would be our outlier, and you would just approximate what that coordinate is. So it's about, I don't know, maybe 24, no, maybe like 36,000. Okay, and then here it asks you for identifying a point that the cluster is around. So if you notice in our graph, there seems to be a cluster happening around here. So you would just approximate a coordinate where this cluster is identified. And then if you scroll, then you can see the answer key there. So again, that's the coordinate I already mentioned for your outlier. And then here, the cluster would have been around 2002 and 120. All right. There's some extra practice on clusters and outliers that you guys should practice on your own. The answer is provided on the next page. Then we talk about something that I definitely wanted to clarify. So I'm just going to read this. It says, when data are collected, the points graphed usually do not form a straight line. The reason why they don't cause a straight line, we already talked about this, is because it's real life data. But they may approximate a linear relationship. So what does that mean? It means that your data is following a line of best fit, or what we call a trend line. And that just means that you can draw a line in your data that is close to most of the data points. So if you look at the examples, the lines that are drawn are not going through every single point, but we can draw a line through the data that falls in between majority of your data. So if you look at a scatter plot moving forward and you feel like you can draw a trend line, then you can say that this data is linear. Linear in a different sense than what we were working on with constant rates of change. Scatter plots do not have constant rates of change. A lot of you were talking about them. We don't really use constant rates of change in scatter plots. The only time it may come up is if we ask you for the equation of your trend line, but it's not really that often. So I wouldn't be too concerned with a constant rate of change. You want to focus more on identifying the correlation, identifying if it's strong or weak, and then deciding if a trend line would be appropriate to be drawn to say that this data is linear. Okay, so the one on the left is a positive correlation. It is linear because most of your points are following the trend of a line, which is why that trend line is drawn. And then we have the one on the right, which is not as linear, but you can draw that trend line to show that more so that the data is decreasing. Okay, so here is our linear relationship model. Okay, these are both a positive and a negative linear relationship of a scatter plot, and then here is an example of a nonlinear relationship. Okay, this would also be no correlation because you cannot say that it's only positive or it's only negative. Okay, it's both increasing and decreasing, so it's no correlation as well as nonlinear. Okay, so this is a model showing how to draw that trend line. If you look at the stars, it tells you want to try to draw that line in the middle of the data where the points are on top and bottom of the line. You do not need to start at the origin like is shown here. You also don't need to start at the first data point in your graph because sometimes that data point might be an outlier. It might not be where majority of your points are. So don't feel like that's your guiding starting point. You really are just drawing this line in between most of your data. Some of the points might lie on the line, but you want to make sure you have about the same amount above the line and the same amount below the line. Okay? All right. So we'll keep going. Here, it's asking you to draw a trend line in the data. So you should practice doing that. Check it against the answer key. Then there are some practice graphs. So we would really like it if you guys do practice making these scatter plots. Okay, so it's asking you to plot the scatter plot on the graph below and then draw a line of best fit. So I know some of you were having trouble printing, which is fine and understandable. I would say either sketch it on a piece of paper, use Desmos. There is an option to make a trend line. Some of you already have sent me graphs with trend lines. So just practice doing that because it is important that you know how to draw a trend line on a scatter plot. Again, this isn't something you're submitting, but you really should practice doing this. Okay, there's another practice problem there. Again, really should go over how to do that. And then there is this. Okay, so this is a discussion question. Some classes are answering these questions on the stream. Some classes are answering these questions in a Google form. I know that 801 and Miss Camp's class, I forget which 8 she has, 811. You guys are answering, is it 811? I don't know. Miss Camp's class and Miss Mataskill's, you are answering this in a Google form. You are not answering this on the stream. Okay, it was mentioned in your morning reminder, but just saying it again. Okay, so you'll be answering these questions as a multiple choice form. The rest of you will be answering these questions on the stream. You'll see the announcement come up in the morning. And then that is it. All right, so I hope that helped, guys. Make sure you practice making those trend lines. Make sure you go over the vocabulary that was mentioned in this lesson. And then when you are done with that, I'm going to go back to your classwork tab. You're going to see this is 801. You guys will answer this like I just mentioned in a form. The other classes you guys are answering on your stream. And then you'll do your homework and make sure you click submit to get credit for the homework assignment today. All right. Have a good morning.